Welcome to Corporate Law Lab. I'm Neil Taylor, Director of the Corporate Law Center at the University of Cincinnati College of Law and host of the podcast. I'm joined today once again by one of our corporate law fellows, Chris Caudell, who's making yet another appearance on the Corporate Law Lab. Volunteerism is a wonderful thing here at the law school. And our guest today is Louise Brock. Louise has had a widely varied career, but mostly focused on labor and employment, which is Chris's first love. So we should have an interesting conversation that I will try to get out of the way of periodically. But I'm going to start. Welcome to the podcast, Louise.
Thank you so much, Neil and Chris. Great to be here.
So you went to the University of Illinois undergrad, which I'm sorry we beat you 63-10, but all podcasts now include an Indiana football reference. Majored in English with a Spanish minor. Was that something you did with law school in mind, or were you just hoping to never work?
You know, I did not have law school in mind. No lawyers in my family, really didn't think about it. And always enjoyed analytical writing and literature. And so I just kind of went the English route. I was actually double majoring in English and Spanish for about a year or so, and that was brutal. Too much Don Quixote in Old Spanish and vocabulary I was looking up constantly, so that switched to a minor, but just really enjoyed the literature, the analytical writing. With really no set thoughts on what a career looked like.
Well, and back in the day, and you're younger than me, but you could do things like get an English degree or a poli-sci degree and have some expectation that you might be employable in the future. And hopefully that's still true. But I know most parents, when their kids say they want to be an English major now, go, what? How did your family react to you pursuing that?
You know, probably the most positive was I went to University of Illinois, which was in-state, cheap, and not far from home. That's what they cared more about, I would say.
Yeah.
But I've always found that doing what I enjoy helps me do well at it. Doing well seems to really have held me in good stead over the years. So I really went into college with the support of my parents of taking classes and majoring in something that I was interested in and would enjoy. Because those are the classes you want to spend time working on. And I think doing well at whatever you choose looks better than picking something you think you should do, but not doing great at it.
Right. Well, and you must have done well, because from there it was to the University of Michigan Law School, which I understand has aspirations as good as UC.
Yes, I know they're working on it. You know, I actually got engaged to my now husband my junior year in undergrad. He was a year older, and so he was looking at grad schools in chemical engineering, and I still had another year of undergrad. To cut a long story short, he got into University of Michigan, among other places, and went there, and I thought, great, I'll just go to Michigan Law School. I had no idea how hard it was to get in. And as I researched it, I started freaking out a little bit about it. But I wrote a very sob story essay, maybe, for the law school saying, my, fiance, who'll be my husband, is going to grad school there, and I'd really like to go too. So maybe that in combination with my grades. And my LSAT was pretty good, got me in.
It probably was a sub-story essay, but it's a good story.
It was true.
So how was the transition to law school? You obviously went straight through and didn't go out into the world of work between undergrad and law school. Did you find the step up challenging, or was it okay? Many of our guests on the podcast loved their time at law. Curious if it was the same for you.
So I found that I was prepared for the volume because I had done a lot of reading and writing as an English major. And so I was comfortable with that. What was tricky was that there were no grades until finals. And I found that hard not to get feedback on whether I was learning the information. So that was weird. And then after first semester, I got, I think, all B's. And I hadn't gotten a B since seventh grade. So my conclusion from that was I need to study harder because I just recognized I'm around really smart people. Everybody's smart, and all it was a final. And so after first semester, I got into that mode of, so people are into writing outlines of the material. I think that's still a thing. I did my outlines first semester at the end of the semester to pull it all together. Going into second semester, I developed the outlines throughout the semester. So I was constantly reinforcing my notes and discussion and the case books, and my grades got better after that. But I just had to study harder, spend more time.
Yeah, and I found that doing my own outlines, I mean, Chris, jump
Yes.
in here because we're talking about before the turn of the century in law school, right? But
Rethink history, right? I mean, and I think I'm a little different in the way that I don't like people, I think, rely on outlining, at least now, as the only way to prepare for their exams. And, I don't really outline. And I think that is scary for people. But, I think there are other ways to do it. And, it sounds like really kind of remedial, but I get out the world's largest stack of flashcards. And that's what I do.
Yes.
And, and it works after doing them about 45,000 times, right? But yeah.
Do you make your own?
Oh, and I handwrite them, but I have terrible penmanship, so it looks like I have some kind it looks like I've never written before in my life. But that's okay. A little, kind of translation of that.
I hate to
Yeah.
tell you, but I think you are outlining. You're just doing it on
Yeah, no,
flashcards
you're totally
instead.
right. I
That's
think
right.
you go to law school and people tell you I have a 100-page outline for torts or whatever, and that's kind of scary, when you first start law school, 100 pages and you memorize that. Well, okay, they're not memorizing that obviously. So yeah, I think you're right. I definitely am outlining just on flashcards, which kind of might not make a lot of sense, but it works. I think allegedly.
If it works, keep doing it.
There we go.
Right. Yeah.
What stood out from your time in law school when you look back on it? Did law school lead you to labor and employment, or is that something you discovered in private practice?
Yeah, so I did develop an interest in it during law school. What I really found so great at Michigan was the camaraderie among students. And sometimes I think that can be hard to come by at a competitive, high performing institution. That's the Big Ten vibe, which I love, double Big Ten. So that was great. The professors were amazing. How knowledgeable, how engaging. Certainly some I liked better than others, but that was really just a major, positive there. The labor employment piece was interesting. I was looking at law firms that were coming on campus to interview 2Ls. And one of the firms coming on campus was at the time, maybe 30 attorney firm in Chicago that doesn't exist anymore. And it was a labor and employment boutique. And I thought I wanted to work at a smaller firm. I'm a very kind of low key, straightforward person. I like to be casual. I thought that a big firm would be stuffy and very hierarchical. So I had in my mind, small firm. I'm like, great, small firm, Chicago, where I grew up. What's this labor and employment stuff? So I started looking into it to understand it. And then second semester, my second year, I took a couple of classes. Employment discrimination, labor law, and it really piqued my interest. I was leaning towards litigation, and employment law is litigation, but it's specialized. I liked that idea. I also liked the idea of proactive work, that it wasn't all litigation, that there was a lot of advice and counsel, a lot of policy writing, a lot of training. I'd played tons of team sports growing up, and so I liked kind of leading and teaching, coaching, and that is something you do a lot of in labor and employment. So it led me to actually work at that firm in Chicago for the summer, and that solidified my interest. And I went into my third year of law school knowing I want to do labor and employment. I ended up interviewing at a lot of other places. that led me to Cincinnati after law school rather than back to Chicago. But I decided then I want to do labor and employment. But the small firm in Chicago was kind of stuffy and hierarchical. So I realized it's not the size of the firm, it's the culture of the firm. And that's where Dinsmore became a great fit. Yeah.
And obviously the coursework was, was big for you kind of in setting up your career trajectory in that way. Did you have any like externships or clinics outside of your summer work or even like journals that, helped you kind of solidify that interest? Was it mainly your summer work at that, relatively stuffy boutique firm in Chicago that mainly drove you?
Yeah. I did a clinic. I did a couple of clinics at Michigan, and in one of them, I got to work on an employment case. It was a Michigan State Human Rights Commission charge. So that's the state agency within the kind of that EEOC realm, representing a woman who was a bartender slash server at a bar restaurant in Michigan who was claiming sexual harassment. So I got to work on her charge, and we think it tried to kind of go into court at the next stage of an appeal. And that was, again, very interesting. It's very people-oriented. Facts can be salacious and shocking, and that can be fun as the lawyer, maybe not fun as the poor victim and clients. But that did help me realize I was interested in that area. But again, I was at Michigan. I will be very admittedly liberal person, and I thought I'd be representing employees, saving the world, civil rights. And I did realize that I could be a management lawyer and help companies do it right and have their supervisors not sexually harass any of their employees. So I got comfortable with exploring management firm jobs, but I solidified my interest in employment, in particular labor law. I had to kind of learn a little bit more about.
Nice, that's awesome. And then so post your summer work, how did you went to Dinsmore, correct? After this, is that where your next step was?
Yeah, my third year, I actually interviewed at both Dinsmore and Procter and Gamble, and P&G then, and I think still will hire law students like graduating right out of law school, certainly early career. Had a whole full day interview, met amazing people at P&G, and did not get an offer at P&G. Got an offer at Dinsmore, which I always think is kind of a fun story because I ended up at P&G years later anyway. But it worked out great because P&G's model was to rotate lawyers through a few different assignments every 3 years. And I'm like, I want to do labor and employment. So they probably picked up on that. I don't think she wants to do the marketing job. We're going to put her in first. So Dinsmore was great. I know you've had George Vincent on your podcast a couple times.
Twice now.
Yeah. And he came to Michigan to recruit for Dinsmore. I think he wanted me to work in the corporate department. And I'm like, no, I want to work in labor and employment. So he's like, okay. So it worked out great. The firm was awesome. I want to say it was probably like 150 lawyers at that time.
Wow.
Yeah. And I really clicked with the folks. The culture, first name basis, didn't feel stuffy. The labor and employment group had a really good reputation too at the firm. Yeah, so it was an interesting decision. I had no connections in Cincinnati. My husband was finishing his PhD at Michigan. Our parents were all in the Chicago area, and we're like, yeah, Cincinnati's not that far. Had a great time visiting it when I interviewed, and we just made the decision to pack up from Michigan and move to Cincinnati. Yeah.
And so it was really the cultural fit, the people that made you not only go there, but then stay there because you were there quite a while.
Yeah. And I really thought hard about whether I wanted to be a partner at the firm because my sense as the years went by was that if the mindset wasn't to become a partner at the firm, then I should work somewhere else and do something else because that really felt like kind of that mindset of wanting to grow the firm, be a part of management. And right around probably my third, fourth year as an associate, I'm like, yes, I want to be a partner at this firm And so just continued through that path. I had 2 kids as an associate, and the firm was awesome supporting that. In fact, when I got back from my first maternity leave, the first thing I worked on was a U.S. Supreme Court case. So
Wow.
that made me feel pretty good, right? Not, I don't know, can she handle it? She's got a little kid. Nope. Amazing, just experience with that. And that's a labor law case. So, Chris, you'll want to talk about that one. But
Absolutely.
yeah, so I was an associate for, I think it was 8 years, a partner for 4 years. I did a lot of P&G work during my time at Dinsmore, handling their litigation, employment litigation, and got to know the culture at P&G. I remember sitting in just stop me, I'll just keep rambling on some of these things. We were defending depositions of managers in these discrimination cases. I remember one time sitting there in this deposition thinking, I want this guy to be my boss. Like, I really heard from these managers, like how they treat people and their expectations and the mission and the purpose, values, and principles of the company. And I got this vibe of what corporate culture is. So that was kind of a neat way to see the inside of the company without, kind of while being on the outside still. And that just led, as time went by, to really being approached about whether I wanted to work there. The experienced labor and employment lawyers, several of them had retired in fairly close succession, and the one left really needed help training new lawyers in labor and employment when they rotated through and just having some more experience. So I actually started out spending half my time at P&G while I was still at Dinsmore, kind of a in-house, what is it, like a secondment sort of, yeah. So it's like 50-50. So I actually had probably like 1.5 jobs at the time. It was a little crazy, but again, amazing to get to see what it's like to work there and work with the HR professionals who are amazing, experienced, knowledgeable, caring. So yeah, and that ultimately led to Louise, you want to work here? And George Vincent just going, all right, we'll let you go. You shouldn't, it's better here. But, because he knew the client really well. And so that was kind of an interesting time, really hard decision. I didn't like billable hours, keeping track. Nobody does. But I wouldn't trade a day that I worked at the firm. It was a great place to work. And then just made that shift. And now I had Dinsmore lawyers were my outside counsel. And I was reviewing bills and asking them to do things for me. That was weird. That was weird, for sure.
I had the same experience where I went in-house, from a firm that represented the company that I joined.
Yes.
And they were like, hey, we have one of our friends in there. And I think that lasted maybe a month, before I found that I started off being very deferential to outside counsel, and because I understood exactly what they were doing. And then I stopped caring, not entirely, but I became much more, I was focused on my client, and it didn't matter that I had known you for 10 years anymore. How was that for you? Was it the same or?
Partly a lot of the lawyers I was working with were associates that I'd been working with. So we just had this kind of trusting, collaborative relationship already. One thing I've always felt like I can relate to is billing time and what it takes and how long it takes to do things. And so I've found myself to be fairly generous and non-picky about that. I've had lots of in-house colleagues that are losing their mind all the time about how long something took and the description. And I'm like, been there, done that, it's fine. And so I would just actually feel like I had more leeway and understanding and empathy for for that. Certainly quality of product, turnaround, communication, those are things where you can bump heads. But if communication's good, pretty probably everything's fine. Something else that
completely
yeah,
agree
go ahead,
with that.
Daniel.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I completely
No,
agree with that. I mean, I was not, when I say I was less deferential, it wasn't that I was going through the bills going, this doesn't seem like this conversation that, you wrote down as a point two should have actually taken 12 minutes. I mean, and there were, it was the rise of billing software then where you were essentially forcing your external lawyers to recast their descriptions to not be caught up by the software, as opposed to having them change how they did the work. So, I actually put in my billing guidelines, you can have intra-firm conferences. I actually want the associates to talk to the partners and avoid spinning wheels in the library for 4 hours if they can 15 minutes resolve a question. So
right.
my lack of deference was much more on, and I was an associate now all of a sudden managing external partners. So it was,
Yes,
you know,
that's different too. Yes,
quite a bit
yes.
different. And I got over that pretty quickly and just started telling people what to do, even though they were, more experienced and older and wiser than me.
Pre moving in house, so when you were still at Dinsmore, you had managed to become a partner, which I think, for especially because I know you said you didn't have any lawyers in your family. I think, at least in law school, I think you see that's kind of like the ultimate achievement, right? Becoming partner, that's like what everybody wants, right? So during this time when you're building your career as an associate, and then you become partner, was there like a particular niche that you found in your practice that you were like just excelled at? Do you think that's advantageous for associates to really develop that specialization in a way? And kind of what I mean by niche, because I was talking to Neil about this before the podcast, and I was like, it was a really crazy way I phrased it, probably just like I just did now. I meant like, defending
Yeah.
collective actions, like those kinds of things, that kind of stuff.
I would say I'll talk about like the legal, maybe industry first, and then I'll do me personally. I would say a lot of it depends on where you work as a labor and employment lawyer. A lot of the labor and employment work is being done by big firms that only do labor and employment law, or that's like 80%. And so when a firm is just doing labor and employment, it gets very specialized. They will have a WARN Act expert who will know all the 50 states and federal and maybe wrote the regulations. There will be FLSA, Fair Labor Standards Act, collective action expert in California. So, that gets more specialized if you go to a firm that just does that work. If you're at a firm that maybe has a labor and employment group within a larger firm, I would think you're going to be interested in more generalist labor and employment lawyers so that you can do a variety of work for the big corporate clients. There's also those particular skills that we all have that are different. Are you a trial lawyer? Are you good at standing up and doing oral argument and doing litigation? Are you great at writing motions for summary judgment and appellate briefs? Are you a great people person where we want to put you in front of the clients because they will understand what you're saying? You're great at explaining stuff. You're great at doing training. Go there and train all their supervisors. So you can really draw on different strengths to go into different kinds of aspects of the work. Great writers versus the people. And I worked with a lawyer at Dinsmore who was just an amazing writer, and we just stuck him on appellate briefs. I did a lot of training and things, but I got to do a bunch of labor arbitrations, which was hard to come by as years went by. Some of the more senior attorneys would keep that work because there wasn't a ton of it. So getting to do that was amazing, but that was trial. It's like doing a trial without a jury and discovery. It's awesome. So if you like that, that is a way to get to do that as a labor employment lawyer. Yeah, so again, I would say kind of depends on where you're working. In-house, definitely more of a generalist. I gravitated towards first P&G and then ultimately Bridgestone, because they had actually developed labor and employment groups, more than one person doing labor and employment in-house, which is somewhat unusual. And so you can have people who specialize a little bit depending how many lawyers are doing it. I liked litigation. I liked interacting with people. Was also a pretty good writer from all my time, so I could crank out a motion for summary judgment like nobody's business and did a lot of those.
Even
So I
in-house?
liked the mix. Not in-house, no. That was all law firm. Once I went in-house, it's, again, but it also depends on the company you're at. So at P&G, almost all the position statements were sent outside, definitely all the litigation. And the in-house lawyers were much more investigating things and giving advice, a little bit of legal research still. Bridgestone, actually a bigger labor and employment team, and has employee arbitration agreements. So there's a lot of matters, almost all will go to mediation and arbitration, not to litigation. So there's the ability to do more in-house because you don't need to be licensed and have all the different courts and practice. And it's less time, but more of a mix of what is done in-house. And it saves a ton of money to do it in-house. You have to have a big team. All the labor arbitrations at Bridgestone are done in-house by a really experienced, knowledgeable lawyer who practiced a long time before going to Bridgestone. Yeah, so it depends, again, the makeup of the team, what people want to do. When I managed my team, I would really spend a lot of time understanding what they wanted to work on and didn't want to work on. And why don't we do what we want to do and send outside counsel the stuff we don't want to do? So kind of to your point, Neil, you got to do the stuff I don't want to do. I'm paying you, so you have to do it.
So the based on your experience, at a firm and then being in-house at several large companies, is there a developing area that you think would be that labor and employment associates would be wise to focus on or to really get interested in?
Well, one thing that does always happen is change. You get new administration and the laws flip-flop. EEOC right now, what's going on there? I mean, things are being turned on their head. It's a totally different mindset, approach, focus areas. So that's going to change all the time. What are the priorities of an administration? Where are they going after, companies? Where are they focusing? And brushing up on that. So staying on top of the developments is really important. Compliance is a really big challenge with employment law because of the 50 states. And when there's a federal government that's not passing uniform legislation, then the states are going to do it. Blue states, red states doing different things, some not doing anything, some doing a lot. And really knowing how to tackle compliance across multiple states is really, really important. It's a hard nut to crack also, just to monitor and keep track of all of it. Yeah, so that's definitely, yeah.
Do you rely on watching that bouncing ball and trying to figure out, is Massachusetts going crazy and Arizona's letting us do whatever the heck we want? I don't remember ever thinking that way, other than I spent a lot more time at MCAD than whatever the Arizona equivalent was of the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. That stood for. I can still do some acronyms. But, you talked earlier about being attracted to the P&G culture when you were a Dinsmore lawyer. I'm sure you saw other corporate cultures at Dinsmore that you didn't say, wow, that's great. I wish I could be part of that. How did you see the difference? And was it perfectly written codes of conduct or something different?
So certainly code of conduct sets a baseline, and how do your leaders talk about integrity, ethics, conflicts of interest, diversity, equity, and inclusion, non-discrimination, all that stuff. So that's a key. For me, two big things that I've come to value very much are people development and good leadership. A culture that cares about creating opportunities for those newer employees and really helping folks develop a career and fostering their strengths and having managers who spend time doing that, that's special. Is challenging because a lot of managers are also, individual contributors, is that the other term, where they have to do stuff. There are just some things you have to do. And how do you balance that with coaching your people, managing them, finding out what their interests are and what career path they want? And that's where Bridgestone worked for me as the next step because, they the way P&G has it. And then strong leadership and teaching people how to be leaders. You can learn stuff for sure, right? You see what that person does, and you take a combination of things you like and you kind of develop yourself that way as a leader. But you can learn leadership. There are great courses and do sessions, does the company themselves offer, or external programs? And that's highly valued. That makes a difference.
I think you're speaking this. I probably dumb it down when I say it. I always told my people that I managed, and then how I felt was, if you really know your team, that's how you're going
Yes.
to be able to. And that's what you said it obviously in a very articulate way that I obviously can't do.
You're spot on.
But I think that's really what it comes down to. And it's not about, knowing that, one of your managers, her name is Rebecca, has a dog named Spot. That's, of course, important about people's families and children and their lives. But I think it's also kind of knowing what you spoke to earlier about having your people be able to do what they're interested in. Because I think it makes, work more meaningful for them. And I think also it makes them want to stay. And so that kind of builds the culture. And, it's really refreshing to, I think, hear from somebody that, maybe thinks like I do. I don't know if I think you are wise to be a people person in labor and employment. I think that makes a lot of sense. But, sometimes I feel like people get lost in the work and, and like you said, individual contributors that are also managers. I mean, especially at companies like Procter & Gamble and Kroger, they have such a large scope of their own work that,
Yes.
managing people really goes to the wayside because and by necessity in some instances, especially as, I think companies focus more on, turning a higher profit every quarter, which is their role. I think that becomes more difficult. But yeah, it was great to hear that. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem becomes when a manager is permitted by the corporate culture to outsource management of their team. When the manager goes to HR and says they're a mess, do something. No, that's your job. Or when they go, oh, well, compliance says something's gone wrong. Compliance has to fix that. It's like, no, that was your job to stop that from happening and to not create the conditions where that was going to happen. And for me, go ahead.
Yeah, and you've actually hit on what's probably the neatest part for me going in-house as an employment lawyer is you are now working with a direct manager of the employee, HR, maybe compliance, maybe security, and you're part of this group that's figuring out, what do we do? Like, how do we approach this? And certainly your legal background, your ability to assess risk, all that comes into play. But a lot of it is, what's our culture? What's our precedent? What's the right thing to do? What example are we setting? And certainly, what's the legal risk? What if we get sued? How does this person feel? What if it makes the front page, page of the news? And being part of that conversation, it happens less often when you're at the firm. At the firm, you're talking to maybe the in-house counsel or an HR person. In-house, you're part of a much broader conversation. That's fun.
And that group can drive things far more than an individual ever can.
Yes.
When I would say, like, if you look at why things go wrong, you can often find a group that lost its way and all went together along this road because no one wanted to challenge the groupthink. And then you're like, how did you get to this part where you're falsifying documents? Hypothetically, none of my clients would have ever done such a thing, but maybe one or two. You know that these people don't wake up in the morning going, "Hey, I know, let's make up some crazy stuff that isn't actually true, but everybody will be happy with it." It doesn't happen in that way. The group, something, they go from taking a shortcut to then having to hide the shortcut to then having to create a story about why it's not really a shortcut. And it's not, we talk a lot about slippery slopes, and sometimes slippery slope arguments drive me crazy. But the one where you don't notice that a whole group of people has gone off in the wrong direction is so dangerous for any organization, corporate or otherwise.
This kind of segues a little bit into a topic that became a real big focus in my stint as Vice President of DEI at Bridgestone, which is psychological safety, and how a culture and your leaders really establish whether you have a culture where employees feel like they can sound the alarm, they can let someone know they made a mistake, they might not hit a number and will be honest about it instead of covering it up. And that kind of inclusive, safe, be yourself environment is actually good for compliance. And I really liked how it brought employment law, compliance, HR, culture, good management all together. And that's frankly where I go, and I think DEI, and that's where I just, we want to go there, we can now.
Let's go there. But before we do, let me plug your forthcoming appearance at the Corporate Law Center Symposium on March 6th. You're going to be appearing on the first panel after the opening address is what I'm now calling it. Since I'm doing it, I can't invite myself to do the keynote and have that make sense. I'm still going to do it. And the panel's, the title we've come up with is Whistleblowing Might Be Bad for Whistleblowers. Is there a better way? And that's what we've been talking about, to have somebody have to be called a whistleblower, right? That they can be thought of as a helper. Somebody who helps you see that you've done something that maybe you don't want to do there, or you're about to consider an action that is probably not in keeping with the law, the culture, whatever. But if it becomes, has to become full-blown whistleblowing, so many of those end up to be horrible experiences for the whistleblower themselves, not only. And I guess it's completely unavoidable to have some whistleblowing in labor and employment. So let me stop there and see if you can find that there was a question in there somewhere.
Yeah. At Bridgestone, we called the person who called in a complaint, like to the hotline, or to be a reporter. They report the incident. Sometimes they're also the kind of impacted employee or the victim. Sometimes not. They're just reporting something that they've observed or heard about. So that's a pretty generic word also. I like that too.
But you should ideally you have a culture where they don't have to call the hotline, where they say, I don't think that's what this company is about. And everybody goes, you're right. That's not how we behave here. And I know that's an idealized version, but for me, the idea that if you have a successful program, it's because people are calling the hotline. It's like, I don't know, they're like hitting the last release valve they have before they go outside the company.
Yeah. There's kind of that progression, and even the code of conduct will often lay that out, right? Can you go to your manager first, your supervisor, or their supervisor? Okay. If not, HR, or go to legal directly. Over the years, at both companies I worked at, multiple times I would have employees that just came to me. as their first report or a report. And it's like, okay, I have to know how to deal with this and take it to the next level as needed. So you have all those different outlets that you would absolutely, prefer to a hotline because it's, again, it's more formal. You got to bring in other things, but it's so important to have that because there's a way to, at least in the US, to report anonymously with a hotline. And it's important to have that, at least we think in the US. I think in Europe, really reporting is not, I don't know if it's even like permitted. I'll get a little fuzzy on this culturally
I
and
mean, I
historically.
spent
Yeah.
15 years working in Europe, and it is a bit of a minefield. You really have to approach it with not thinking of it as, when I first got to Brussels, I would always say, this is how we did it in the US, and people would recoil. And I had explained that I'm just saying this because it's my frame of reference, not because I
Yeah.
think it's right. And you'd have so many cultural issues of there much people. Actually, I don't think it's as different other than what's written down. I don't think how people react to it in Europe is 100% different from how people react to it in the US. In the US, you'd like to have a culture where people don't have to report anonymously.
Right.
And if you are driving toward that kind of culture, you won't find that there's a huge divide between how your American operations operate and how your European operations operate. Where I found the biggest difference in terms of structuring the code of conduct was the obligation to report wrongdoing, which is a feature of most U.S. codes of conduct and is, when you try to even introduce the subject in Europe, you get a lot of history lessons, that we all know. But, I would, and every country would say, well, that might be okay with the people across the border, but it ain't going to fly here. And you go across the border and they go, well, that might be okay where you just came from, but it ain't going to fly here. And, it's just, and I don't think it was, I think that the obligation to report is something that we put in codes of conduct. I'm not quite sure why. And I'll talk about it at some more length at the symposium.
Louise, I've talked about this a couple times already. The importance of the culture, obviously, just being able to, develop the workplace into where it's just a feature of being a responsible team member, where you just say what's going on, and that's well received by the entire team, and not having to use those hotlines. I think obviously, I think is the ideal. But to your earlier point, I think that's just part of developing that culture and why it's so important. And then you get into features of diversity and inclusion and those other parts that make this culture possible. So that's really all I had on that. But
well, let's go there on DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. I mean, we previewed for you that we wanted to ask you a number of questions on it. And how about if I just ask them all at once and let you run with it? Do you believe that it drives performance? Do you understand the backlash against it? And how did you keep it from becoming what people are afraid of?
So I would say, yes, it improves performance. And I've read a lot of studies and research and information that really highly reputable consulting firms have done to show it. And it also makes sense that people who are not trying to cover up who they are or who are not having exposure to equal opportunities or different ideas aren't in play, you're not going to get the most out of your people. So I think it has a logic to it as well. The backlash was, they're certainly very intense. There are undoubtedly some situations and companies that I'll say over-rotated after George Floyd was murdered. And there were, there's going to be experts popping up and products and new shiny objects popping up when something gets a lot of attention. And some companies, I think, gravitated towards some things and they wanted to put things in place and didn't have perhaps the foundation and the history and the culture where it fits. And so it wasn't perhaps really authentic, and maybe was easier than to just get rid of it when it was being challenged so much by the administration. But then some of the programs and just how companies thought about it wasn't the right way to think about it. Truly, like affirmative action and the history of it and the foundation of the civil rights laws is about equal opportunity and leveling the playing field. It's not about quotas and special treatment. But not everyone has understood that, and it's nuanced, and it can be complicated, and it can be tricky to implement. And your words matter, and managers who don't have enough context or experience just think, oh, I need to have a woman here, so the next person I hire should be a woman. No, that's not the way to do it. You look and you try to understand, why are our numbers how they are? Do we have subconscious bias going on? Do we not provide benefits that help people get to work? And just really trying to understand your own company and where you are. Bridgestone in particular, just since that's where I did the focus of my work there, has a history of doing work in this space. There's a motto that Bridgestone took on in recent years, which is free to be. In fact, I'm wearing my free to be sweatshirt and pullover. Part of the culture was about really inclusion, and maybe it wasn't called that. Bridgestone sponsored Nashville Pride going back like 14 years, I think, at this point, before it even had an employee resource group for LGBTQ employees. It was sponsoring pride in the community. And so there was a foundation for it. And also Bridgestone followed the path in a gradual way. It did accelerate. And once things got going, more employee resource groups developed, but it wasn't this 0 to 100 overnight. It was thoughtful, authentic choices about what programs to put in place. So, some companies, there were things that were done that's like, oh my God, it's like, what is that saying? Bad facts make bad law. I mean, there are some cases, reverse discrimination cases, you read the facts and you're like, oh my, they did what? Yes, this was not the right way to do it. This is clearly discrimination. But yeah, it's hard. It's a narrative. It's words that get spun and twisted and used, and that's frustrating. But I do think it comes down to that authentic fit with your own company and culture, the things you do. But data is data also. And when you look at the availability of certain, demographic groups in the workforce, and then you look at it in certain jobs and companies, it doesn't make sense that it would be so out of whack. So something is wrong. And affirmative action and diversity, equity, inclusion means looking at that and understanding why. Why do we have this many? I'll just go with women. That's easy for me to do. Why do we have this many women at this level and half the percentage at the next? Why is that? Does that make sense? Wouldn't we have an equal number throughout the organization in certain places? So you dig in. You don't say, okay, we need to put more women there. No, you need to understand what's happening. Do we need more mentoring? Do we work these crazy hours and the reality is the moms are more affected than the dads, or not? Just understanding it and then putting in place training or a system or an HR program to level the playing field.
Well, you mentioned how when you had children as a young associate that it did not negatively impact your career, which, you can sort of see an argument from the associate in the next office. Well, I didn't get, and now there was no such thing as paternal leave back when my kids were born. If I'd shown up at the law firm and said, my wife's had a child, I'll be gone for X number of weeks, they would have been like, no. So,
Yeah.
I do think that As a manager, however, I found that supporting a young family, and saying, okay, let's make sure that this works,
Yes.
until they reach the, school age and beyond, that I got back so much loyalty and
Yes.
hard work when they were at work, that you kind of discovered they didn't have to be there 60 hours to be effective. If you change the expectation to, I would actually change the expectation to, I do not want to see you here after this time. You're going to go do the school run, and great, get your partner to do the school run the next day so that you don't do it every day, but I don't want to
Right.
see you here every day stressed out about whether or not your child is being appropriately cared for. And what I got back was an amazing amount of hard work when they were there. And I
Right.
just think at some level, this all comes down to, human beings treating each other well, which sounds very Pollyanna, but it'd be nice.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing about COVID, to dredge up PTSD on this, COVID showed a lot of us what challenges like our coworkers face day to day. I mean, I had lawyers on my team who had little kids at home and spouses working, and how do you juggle all that and still do the work, and also showed what can be done remotely and how it can be flexible. But it really, I think, showed that it affects men and women, single, married, parents involved, different generations, all those different things. And it really reminded us we need to understand and empathize with the different things our employees are juggling in their lives and figure it out. Certainly, you got to expect performance and communication, and good managers have to hold their employees to that as well. They're not going to, be able to get a pass on meeting certain expectations, but empathy and communication and recognizing that is really important. And it gets back to what you were saying, Neil, and that you're getting that loyalty, getting that engagement, getting that performance. In the end, it's better for the company.
So even I think COVID's a really good segue too, with this. So it's like, in reflection on your career at Dinsmore as a partnershiping partner, and then in-house at major global corporations, and then getting through something as I think challenging and stressful as a pandemic, among I'm sure many other stressful work events, work-related events, people-related events. What kept you passionate about the work? What made it continue to be gratifying for you?
Certainly variety and the crazy things that people do and things that happen. You get to a point where you think you've seen everything, then someone does something, you're like, okay, I did not think that would happen. So that would always keep it fun. I also happen to really like lawyers. I like talking to them. I like working through issues, and I've really enjoyed outside counsel that I've worked with. Over the years, we would kind of make some changes. We would do RFPs, requests for proposals, and we would change our counsel, and I'd get to know even better some new lawyers. And I've always enjoyed that. I did the DEI. I decided to do the DEI role to get a little bit of a change. And I figured I was just had probably another couple years left in my corporate career. And I thought, you know what? I could shake it up a little and do something a little bit different. So, that's what part of led me to doing that. But I will say that as time goes by, this is why people retire, I hope, is you kind of realize, I see others that are actually more passionate and want to learn AI and want to do electronic discovery and using different apps and getting all this other stuff. And I'm like, I don't know if I really want to spend a bunch of time doing that and learning that. And then you realize, yeah, maybe it is time to let the next generation take over and go do podcasts with law schools and try to be an adjunct professor or do advocacy or something different. So, yeah.
Well, as a late life academic and podcast host, I resemble those remarks.
That's right.
So welcome to the club.
That's right.
Thank you so much for your time. I think we will leave it here because people need to come to the symposium to hear more of your wisdom. And we look forward to hosting you at the law school on March 6th.
Great. I look forward to it.
Thank you. Wonderful to have
Thank
you.
you.